Montana Territory, 1876. The wind howled low through the cottonwoods along the Bitterroot River, and the only thing louder than the current was the sound of hooves pounding dirt. Caroline Farris rode bareback, her copper hair whipping behind her, a rifle strapped to her saddle and dust streaked across her cheeks. She was 22, untamed as the land, and she did not care that folks in town called her wild. She had grown up on the soil, knew every bend in the river, every ridge of the mountains. It had been just her and her little sister Sadie for 5 years now. Since the fever took their parents, Caroline had raised her near alone. But now Sadie was gone. Caroline gritted her teeth, spurring her horse on faster. The tracks led west, 2 sets of boot prints, deep and careless, and Sadie's smaller ones between them. The men had come through their camp last night, while Caroline had gone to fetch water. They had taken Sadie and left nothing but a broken lantern and a smear of blood on the grass. She would find them. She would bring her sister home. And if she had to kill to do it, so be it. Elias Sutton had seen a lot of things in his 30 years. Gunfights over cattle. Wagon trains swallowed by storms. Men who thought they were gods fall to their knees in the mud. But he had never seen a woman ride into a saloon like she owned it, rifle across her lap, and demand help like the world owed it to her. He leaned back in his chair near the hearth, cradling a tin cup of coffee between his palms as she stalked through the doors of the Silver Buckle in Derby. Her boots were caked in dirt, her eyes sharp enough to cut through steel. "I need a tracker," she said, loud enough for every drunk, gambler, and drifter to hear. No one moved. She scanned the room, her gaze landing on Elias. You look sober. Can you ride?" Elias blinked once, then stood. "I can ride." She nodded once. "Good. My sister's been taken. 2 men. West Trail. I followed them to the edge of town but lost the tracks in the rocks. You help me find her, I will pay you." He looked at her hands. No rings. No man standing behind her. Just her. "You carry yourself like someone who does not pay for help," he said. She shrugged. "Then I will owe you." They rode out before noon, following the broken trail along the ridgeline. Elias did not talk much, and neither did she. But she rode with purpose, like someone who had only one thing on her mind. "Name's Elias," he said finally, after they stopped to water the horses. "Caroline," she replied. "Caroline Farris." He nodded. "You always ride alone like this?" She glanced up at him, her voice even. "I do what needs doing. Nobody else will." Elias watched her for a long moment. There was something fierce in her, something most women had been taught to bury. But she wore it plain as the belt around her waist. "People say I am too wild for marriage," she added, almost offhand. Elias smiled into his coffee. "Then they are fools." They found the first man's body 2 days later. Throat cut, dragged into a ravine by wolves. No sign of Sadie. Caroline crouched by the body, her face unreadable. "He was not dead when I left them," she muttered. Elias knelt beside her. Then she might still be alive. She stood suddenly, storm in her eyes. "Then let us ride." By the 3rd night, they camped beneath a pine ridge. The stars were sharp above, and the fire cracked low between them. Caroline sat cross-legged, cleaning her rifle. Elias watched her in the firelight, the way her brow furrowed in focus, her hands steady. There was no fear in her, only grit. "Why did you not stay in town?" he asked. She looked up. "I do not belong there." "Because you ride like a man and shoot straighter than most?" "Because I speak my mind. Because I do not smile when I am told to. Because I would rather sleep under the stars than behind a door." He nodded slowly. "That is not wild. That is free." She met his gaze. For once, she said nothing. They found Sadie on the 4th morning. The second man had tied her to a tree in a burned-out cabin near the creek bend. She was bruised but alive, her dress torn, hands bound. Caroline ran to her, knife flashing as she cut through the ropes. Sadie sobbed into her shoulder, clinging tight. Elias dragged the man from behind the cabin, his hands already raised. "Not a word," he muttered, tying him to the nearest post. After Sadie was safe by the fire, Elias found Caroline by the river. She was washing blood from her hands. "He will hang," Elias said. "I want to shoot him myself." Elias touched her elbow gently. "But Sadie needs you. Alive. Whole." Caroline looked up at him, something cracking in her eyes. "I was so scared I would not find her." "You did," he said softly, "because you never stopped." She exhaled, shoulders slumping. "I do not know how to stop." Elias stepped closer. "Then do not. Just let someone ride beside you for a while." She looked at him long, searching his face. "I am not a woman men marry," she whispered. "I am not most men." They rode back slow, Sadie asleep against Caroline's back, wrapped in Elias's coat. The air was warmer now, the danger behind them, and beside her, Elias rode steady. Caroline glanced over at him. "I do not owe you," she said. "I know. I would not have made it without you." "You would have. But I am glad you did not have to." She reached out, letting her fingers brush his for a moment in the saddle. It was not much, but it was the beginning. The hills had turned green by the time they reached the edge of the valley. Snow still clung to the tops of the sapphires, but below, the thaw had softened the ground and the scent of wet pine hung thick in the morning air. They rode slow, careful with Sadie's bruised ribs and the soreness in her legs, stopping midday near a rise of cottonwoods by the river's bend. Elias laid out his bedroll and set to building a fire. Caroline unsaddled the horses, casting glances toward her sister curled beneath a blanket, face tucked into her knees. There was a tension in Caroline's jaw that hadn't left since the cabin. "She hasn't spoken," she said, crouching beside Elias as he struck flint to kindling. "Not a word." "She will," he answered, watching the sparks catch. "When she's ready." Caroline didn't reply. Her hands rested on her knees, scarred and quiet. Elias didn't press. Instead, he pulled a skillet from his pack and set to slicing dried venison with the slow rhythm of a man used to silence. "She used to hum when she was nervous," Caroline said after a while. "Little tunes. From church, mostly. Mama taught them to us." But now her voice faltered. "Now it's like she's somewhere else." He looked at her then, not with pity, but with something steadier. "She'll find her way back. You've given her the chance." Caroline rubbed her palms together, eyes fixed on the fire. "I don't know what life looks like after this. It looks like whatever you make of it." He stirred the pan, the smell of meat beginning to rise. "You've already done the hard part." "I don't know if I believe that," she said, voice low. "Then let me show you." She turned toward him, unsure what to say, but he didn't push. He just handed her a tin plate with a piece of warm meat and sat beside her without touching. It wasn't comfort she needed, not yet. Just someone who wouldn't look away. That night, they stayed under the cottonwoods. Elias took first watch while Caroline slept beside her sister, one arm draped protectively over the girl's side. He sat near the fire, rifle across his knees, listening to the wind slip through the grass. By morning, Sadie had eaten a few bites of bread and drank from Caroline's canteen without flinching. She didn't speak, but her eyes followed the horses when Elias saddled them again, and she let him lift her into the saddle without protest. They didn't go back to Darby. Instead, Elias led them north, where the land opened wide into grazing country, and a friend of his, an older widow named Mrs. Tilly, kept a homestead with a spare room and gentle hands. She'd taken in strays before, he told Caroline when they paused on a bluff overlooking the valley. Sheep grazed below and smoke rose in a lazy curl from the stone chimney. "She's kind," Elias said. "Doesn't ask many questions." "I thought Sadie might rest easier here." Caroline studied the land. "And where will you be?" "Nearby," he said. "I've got work at the Mason Ranch a few miles west. Fence repair, mostly. I can ride through every few days, make sure all's well." Caroline didn't answer at first. She dismounted, walking a few paces toward the drop-off, boots pressing into damp earth. After a long silence, she said, "I never owed anyone anything. I've kept it that way on purpose." "I know, but I find myself thinking on you. Nights when it gets quiet again." Elias stepped beside her. "What do you think?" She didn't look at him. "That I've never met a man who didn't want to change me. Until you." He reached out, slow and open, fingers brushing the edge of her sleeve. I don't want to change you, Caroline. I want to stand beside you. She met his eyes, the wind catching her hair as it slipped free from the braid. Even if I never stay in one place? Then I'll ride with you. And if I don't ask for softness? I'll still offer it. She breathed in deep and steady. People said I was too wild for marriage. He smiled, quiet. Then they never saw the strength in it. She leaned in only slightly, but it was enough. They stood close, the land stretching wide around them, and nothing else moved but the grass. Later, as they rode down into the valley, Sadie dozing in the saddle again, Caroline glanced at Elias, something new settling in her face. Not gentleness. Not surrender. Just peace, earned and steady. And beside her, Elias rode on exactly as he'd promised. Spring came slow to the valley, the kind that crept in beneath bark and behind the eyes. Days stretched longer, the earth softening underfoot. But it was the quiet changes that marked the season most. A bluebird's nest in the eaves of Mrs. Tilley's barn. The way Sadie lingered in the sunlight longer each morning. The way Caroline no longer looked over her shoulder when the wind rose sudden through the trees. Elias passed through every third day, arriving before supper with his horse lathered and dust on his collar. He brought fence wire, flour, sometimes a book for Sadie. He never stayed past nightfall unless Caroline asked him to. First, she didn't. But one evening in late May, she stepped out onto the porch before he could mount up and said, "You can stay if you want." He didn't ask for a reason. Just tied his horse to the post and followed her inside. Mrs. Tilley had taken Sadie to her Sunday sewing circle, a quiet gathering of widows and schoolmarms who'd begun to fold the girl into their rituals without forcing her to speak. The house was still and warm, the fire low in the hearth, the table cleared but for a lamp and a tin of dried lavender. Caroline poured 2 cups of chicory and handed one to him. She didn't sit right away, just leaned against the edge of the table, watching him over the rim of her cup. "You ever miss having your own land?" she asked. He set the cup down. "I had it once, near Helena. My brother and I built the cabin ourselves. But he went east to study law, and I couldn't hold it alone. You sold it, traded it off for pack mules and a saddle firm enough to keep me moving." She nodded once, slow. "You ever think of settling again?" He looked at her, long and steady. "Not until now." She didn't flinch. "You think I'd let a man build fences around me?" "No," he said. "I think you'd tear them down before he finished hammering." Her mouth pulled into something like a smile, tired and real. "You ever think about what a life with me would look like, Elias?" "I don't imagine much. I notice." She stepped closer. "And what have you noticed?" He didn't reach for her. "You don't like to be spoken for. You sleep light. You keep your boots by the door even when there's no reason to run." She lowered her eyes. "Not sure I'll ever sleep deep again." "You don't have to," he said. "I'll keep watch." Her hand brushed his then, not tentative but deliberate. "There's a part of me that don't know how to be touched soft." He folded his fingers around hers. "Then we'll learn it slow." Outside, a wind passed through the cottonwoods carrying the scent of turned soil and creek moss. Inside, Caroline stepped into the circle of his arms without ceremony, without hesitation. He held her like something meant to be held, not tamed, not changed, just known. They didn't speak again until the fire had burned low and the lamp flickered. "I don't want a man to take care of me," she said against his shirt. "I know. I want one who'll ride beside me even if I ride ahead." "I'll follow," he said. "But only if you look back now and then." She lifted her head. "I steady. I will." That night, they lay side by side on the braided rug before the hearth, not tangled, not rushed. Just close. Her head on his chest, his hand across her ribs. Neither asleep, but not needing to speak. By morning, Sadie returned with Mrs. Tilley, pale blue fabric folded in her hands. She glanced once at Elias brushing down his horse, then turned to Caroline. "I want to make a dress," she said. Her voice was hoarse from disuse but clear. Caroline's throat tightened, but she didn't let it show. "All right," she said. "You pick the thread." And when she turned to Elias, he was already watching her. Eyes soft with something deeper than admiration. something quieter than praise, something rooted. She didn't speak as she stepped to his side, but her hand found his again. This time she didn't let go. By midsummer, the hills shimmered in the heat and the Bitterroot River pulled slow through the valley, lazy and green. Wild roses bloomed at the fence lines and the sheep grazed higher on the ridges, their bells soft against the wind. At Mrs. Tilley's homestead, the days followed a quiet rhythm: fence mending, laundry strung between trees, bread rising in the kitchen heat. But beneath the surface, something sturdier had taken root. Caroline worked with her sleeves rolled high and her hair tied back with an old strip of linen. She had begun helping Mrs. Tilley in the vegetable rows, her hands finding steadiness in tasks that didn't involve rifles or flight. She never spoke of the cabin or what she'd done to get Sadie back, and Elias never asked. But she moved with less weight in her spine now, and her laughter when it came was unguarded. One evening, Elias arrived earlier than usual, his sleeves damp and dust still fresh on his boots. He carried a small wooden box under one arm and leaned it gently against the porch rail before brushing his hands on his trousers. Caroline stepped outside, wiping her palms on her skirt. "What's that?" "Something I traded for in Sula," he said, nudging the lid open with his thumb. Inside, nestled in cloth, lay a set of small carving tools, well worn but sharp, their wooden handles smooth with years of use. "I noticed you keep your hands busy," Elias said. Caroline looked down at them, then back up. "I used to carve little things when Sadie was small. Gave it up when the days got long." He ran a thumb along the handle of the smallest chisel. "Maybe it's time to take it back." She didn't reach for them. "Not yet." "Why would you give me something like this?" "Because not everything you do has to be for survival." The wind shifted, bringing with it the smell of sage and hot earth. Caroline stepped closer, resting her hand near the box but not touching it. "You believe that?" she asked. "I do." She looked at the tools, then lifted her eyes to him. "You're not trying to fix me, are you?" "No," he said. "I'm trying to make room." That night, she stayed on the porch long after the others had gone to bed, whittling a curl of pine from the edge of a cedar block she'd pulled from the woodpile. The blade moved slow, steady, and when Elias stepped outside just before midnight, she handed him the beginnings of a horse's head, rough but sure. "Not bad," he murmured. "I haven't forgotten everything." "You haven't forgotten anything that matters." She didn't answer, just looked out across the dark fields. "I've been offered a foreman's post," he said after a moment. "Up near Stevensville. Decent pay. Cabin with it." She turned to face him. "You taking it?" "I told them I needed time." Caroline studied him. "You asking me to go with you?" "I'm asking what kind of life you want. Not just for Sadie, but for you." She leaned back against the post, the carving still in her hand. "I never pictured myself inside four walls too long. You'd have a key. I'd keep the door open." He stepped closer, not touching her. "I know you're used to doing it all yourself, but I'd like to carry some of it. Not because I think you can't, just because I want to." She looked at him, long and quiet. "You sure about that? I've watched you stand your ground in the face of things most men wouldn't speak of. I've seen the way you hold your sister in the night when she dreams too loud. I've watched you chip bark from a stick like it might bleed truth. There is nothing in you I would change, Caroline, but there's a place in me that's only quiet when you're near." Her hand drifted to his, her thumb brushing the inside of his wrist. "You're not afraid I'll leave?" "No," he said. "I'm afraid I'll never ask, and you'll never know how much I wanted you to stay." She held his gaze a moment longer, then slid the carving into his palm. "You'll ask me again," she whispered. "Soon." And when he leaned in just enough to catch her breath on his cheek, she didn't pull away. She rested there a while, as the stars wheeled slow above the valley, and the wind whispered through the leaves with the sound of a life beginning. Caroline stood on the porch with one hand resting on the railing, her fingers curled loosely around a cup of cooled chicory. The sun was still low, light gold and quiet across the pasture. A hawk circled above the far ridge, tracing wide, deliberate arcs across the open blue. Behind her, the house was still Sadie asleep in the loft room, Mrs. Tilley kneading dough by the hearth. Elias had left early, before first light. His saddle cinched and his coat snapped to the neck. He hadn't said much, only took her hand and pressed a folded piece of paper into it. Now she unfolded it again. It wasn't a letter, just a map hand-drawn, with a notch marked near the river bend north of Stevensville, a spot circled in charcoal, and a single sentence beneath it, "Come see what I've built." She didn't hesitate. By midday, she'd packed Sadie's things in an old flour sack, left word with Mrs. Tilley, and saddled her mare. Sadie rode behind her, arms wrapped tight around her waist, eyes turned toward the mountains. They reached the river bend by dusk. The cabin stood low and square, its roof pitched steep for snow and its windows set deep against wind. There was a small corral off one side, a rail fence newly hewn, and a porch with 2 chairs and a length of rope drying on a nail. Elias stood beside the door, sleeves pushed to his elbows, a cut of cedar in his hand. He was sanding the edge smooth, slow and sure, and he didn't look up until Caroline dismounted. "You built it fast," she said. "I had help from a man who owed me," he replied. "I told him I was building for more than myself." Sadie climbed down without a word and wandered toward the creek behind the house, her hands trailing across the tall grass. Caroline walked the perimeter, boots sinking slightly in the soft earth. She ran her hand along the porch rail, pressed her palm to the frame of the door. "What if I don't want to keep still?" she asked. "Then we'll make the place move with you." She raised an eyebrow. "I mean it," he said. "We'll ride out when the season calls for it, follow the herds or the work. But when you want to come home, this will be yours to return to. And what if I don't want to marry?" He stepped closer, not touching. "Then I'll stay anyway, if you'll have me." She looked up at him, her voice low but without hesitation. "I don't want to be someone's belonging. I want to be chosen every day. I'll choose you even when the trail is rough and the sky turns," he said. "I'll choose you when your hands are calloused and your words sharp. I'll choose you when you ride ahead and when you fall behind. Not because I have to, because I want to." She took a breath, slow and full. "And I'll choose you," she said, "because you never asked me to be anything but what I am." She reached up, touched his jaw with the side of her hand, and kissed him quiet but certain, like a promise spoken in wind and sun. Later, inside the cabin, she ran her fingers along the windowsill, the carved mantel, the woven mat by the door. She found a small shelf near the hearth with carving tools laid out in a neat row, and beside them, the horse's head she had shaped weeks ago, now sanded smooth and varnished. "I built that shelf for your work," Elias said. She turned to him. "Then I'll fill it." Sadie slept that night in the loft beneath a wool quilt stitched with blue and gold thread, her breath even and untroubled. Downstairs, Elias and Caroline lay on a straw mattress tucked against the far wall, the fire giving off the last warmth of the day. She lay with her head against his chest, one leg curled over his, and listened to the steady beat of his heart. "I never thought I'd stay in one place," she whispered. "You didn't," he said. "You found one worth circling back to." She smiled into his shirt. "We'll plant in the spring?" He nodded. "Corn, beans, maybe squash. And I'll carve again. Trade at the post in town. I'll build a stall for your work. And you'll ride out sometimes? When I do, I'll leave a light in the window." She closed her eyes, her hand resting over his. "Then this is home." Years passed that way. Sadie grew into a tall, quiet girl who read faster than anyone in the Bitterroot and could track a fox through snow without snapping a twig. She called Elias her kin without hesitation, and when she smiled, it reached all the way to her eyes again. Caroline's carvings were sold as far as Missoula and Bozeman, her name passed by word of mouth among ranch wives and traders alike. She never worked with patterns, only instincts, and never made the same piece twice. Elias added to the cabin slowly a second room for Sadie, a lean-to for the woodpile, a long bench beneath the porch window where Caroline sat in the evenings, her knife tracing new shapes from old pine. They never married in a church. One morning, just after the first snow, they stood beneath the bare cottonwoods and said their words with Mrs. Tilley and Sadie as witnesses. No preacher, no paper. Only hands clasped and eyes steady. And that was enough. They grew old with the land, not apart from it. And every time Caroline looked to the east, where the hills turned gold in the afternoon light, she knew she could still ride if she needed to, but she never did. Because the life they had built was not a cage. It was a shelter. And in it, she was not tamed, but known. Not softened, but seen. Together, they had found the kind of peace that does not come easy or quick or without cost. But it came, and it stayed.